item 9, which is Cody dieback management. And just to be clear, we're going to hear from our board chair, Greg Presland, who's been working tirelessly to try and work with the local Waitakere Rangers board to get their view on where things stand. So welcome, Greg. I'd like to invite you to join us, and then we'll move into the item. Welcome, Greg and Sandra and Saffron.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Apologies from Steve Tolstrup, who's ill today, and Neil Henderson, who can't make it. And we've had a very sad loss in that one of our local board members is no longer with us, and but I'm sure she's here in spirit, cheering us on. So, can I start today by just saying something that I said to this committee in December when we last talked about the subject, and that's a quote by Peter DeLonghi, who's a scientist at Unitec, and he was previously a principal science advisor at DOC, and I think he sums the issue up very well. He said, "I can tell you now, because of the rate of decline that's being mapped and because we have good data, that kauri is now listed as a threatened species, and I think that's just terrible. This is an iconic tree, a sacred tree protected under the Treaty of Waitangi. Various iwi regard it as their totem tree, and we're potentially going to lose it." And if you wanted a more succinct, stark summary of what the situation that we have right now, I think that's it. So just to very quickly go over the difficulties that kauri dieback poses to us. It's a kauri killer, and they are facing extinction. It's a keystone species. If kauri go, then the health of the forest will be adversely affected. The Waitakere Ranges is regrettably the most heavily affected area in the country, and the affection is concentrated along tracks, watercourses and bait lines. A couple of legal issues I'd just toss into your consideration is firstly, there are, I believe, Treaty of Waitangi considerations. Kauri must be one of the treasures of iwi, and there is an obligation on the Crown and on this council to protect kauri as much as possible. And there's also the Waitakere Ranges Heritage Area Act, which deems that the area is an area of significance. And one of the thing the Act requires is for council to endeavour to protect heritage features, which includes the regenerating lowland and the coastal rainforest. When we came to you in December of last year, our position was that we supported option 4, which was before you, and that was basically the closure of all high and medium risk tracks. We proposed an array of other measures, which included working with ATEED to stop tourist promotion of the area. We wanted more kauri ambassadors on the tracks to inform people of the seriousness of the situation. We wanted council to work with local communities to identify low-risk areas for exercise and recreation. We wanted filming only to occur in non-kauri locations, and we wanted there to be a good visitor guide so that people coming to the area knew how they should behave. And finally, we wanted to prohibit dogs anywhere in the area. And the committee's response was to endorse a modified option 4, which involved the closure of some, but not all, high and medium risk tracks. And there was support expressed for the principles of the Rahui called by Te Karawa Maki. And the and staff were asked to assess the situation and come back for further decisions, which is what today's all about. The next slide just shows, on the left-hand side, it shows the incidence of kauri dieback. Black dots are from the recent survey, red dots are from the earlier survey conducted 5 years ago. And on the right, there's a map of all the tracks in the area. That is an earlier map showing staff's take at the time of what were the high-risk tracks. But I offer this just to show you that there is a very, very strong correlation between the presence of tracks and the presence of dieback. In fact, if you look, for instance, at the coast, you can see straight lines along tracks where the disease is spreading. And basically it's spreading like a cancer along the tracks of the Waitakere Ranges. In terms of the public response to the decision in December, I offer this just as a snapshot of something which the staff have talked to you about already. I went to the car park of Kirikiri Falls in Piha on anniversary day, and that first photograph shows the entrance of the car park. It was completely and utterly full. There's a large car parking area to the right as well that was full. There was a welcoming sign on the left-hand side. There was no sign that the rahui was in place or that there should be thought given to closure of the tracks. This next photograph shows overflow parking and more welcoming signs pointing out where to get onto the track. And things were that busy that all the car park was taken up. And this third photograph shows one of the recent signs that staff had erected. And it's helpful that these signs were put up, but it doesn't convey the seriousness of the situation. You can't read it from the photograph, but the sign says, "Protect Kari for future generations. This is a Kari dieback area. Scrub, spray, stay on track." And this is a car park to a track that was deemed to be a high-risk track. And it was next to another track which has been heavily hit by Kari dieback. So our comments about the public response over the last few months is that it's good that some tracks have been closed, but we are concerned that there is major confusion amongst the public about where they can and can't walk. And we believe that a very simple message needs to be given to the public. And we think it would help to reconsider and redefine the goals that we're trying to achieve. And for the local board, we believe that that we must protect pristine groves of Kari, that we have to quarantine diseased areas. And we say that because a diseased track will almost inevitably have the disease spread along the track, even if everyone does what they should do and cleans their boots. And let's just describe that in another way. I believe that the use of cleaning stations is fundamentally flawed, and that people can do everything that they have to and make sure their cleans are absolutely pristine. But then when they walk past the diseased Kari, they'll then pick up the mud, and all they will do is spread the disease along the track. So it's very sad, but unless you've got the infrastructure in place, once a track has the diseased on it, all Kari are facing the risk of this spread of the disease to them. So the local board, we have talked about this a lot, and we've revised our position. We consider that the park needs to be closed and only specific areas left open. These areas would include the coastal walks where there are no Kari, and for instance water care service roads which are metalled and don't pose any difficulty or any risk to the disease being spread. We believe that there needs to be a process to determine which other tracks can be opened and when, and we believe Te Karawamaki have a very legitimate role in being involved in those discussions, and the community should also be involved. We believe that enforcement of the closure is critical, and what we think Council as a whole needs to do is to take a pause, review the situation, create a long-term coherent plan, and determine what will provide public access and what will protect Kari. We believe our position is consistent with option 3 in your agenda item, which is the recommended option. And the only caveat that we would have on the recommendation is that there needs to be a planned precautionary approach to all issues relating to Kari dieback. And that is one of the most magnificent Kari in the Waitakere Forest, Aunt Agatha, and she is diseased. And we want to stop that from happening again. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Kia ora, Greg, thank you. Thank you for an excellent presentation, and again, thank you to the work that the local board have done, weighing up all the complexity of this and coming up with a really coherent approach. I'm not too sure whether questions are needed at this stage, or if we should go into the item, and then if people do wish to clarify, we can actually go back. Linda, Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, local board members, for bringing that to us. I guess my question is, are you now comfortable with these recommendations that we have before us today?
With the recommendation that the whole forest is closed, yes.
Okay, and the other thing, just noting the spelling of Te Kaura was incorrect on your, just to respect the iwi there.
I'll take the blame for that.
Thank you. Might have been the spell check, but yeah.
I'll blame the typist.
Thanks.
Issue needs to be in the context of an explosion of visitation to the Waitakere Ranges that has been occurring over the last few years. Like on Kirikiri Falls track, the ambassadors are talking to 1,200 people in a day. The patterns of use in the Waitakere Ranges are also changing. The kind of summer high and winter low is altering. They're getting people all year round. They're getting much more off-track activity because people are seeking out places where they can take photos to put on Instagram and take selfies. So people are just crawling over everything. So we've got sort of hugely increased visitation, and what we're really concerned about is the need to have a comprehensive plan so that the implications of closure of particular tracks can be considered, because otherwise we could sort of have unintended consequences of even more people in some places which are unsafe or you don't want them. So there needs to be a plan for the whole ranges to provide things that are safe for the public but are not going to completely trash the place, because it's in danger of that without Kauri dieback.
Thank you. I know we've got a couple of questions. Just this may help. We are looking, and it's not in the series of recommendations today, I don't think, but we'll discuss it when we get to the item proper. We need to relook at the entire track network in the Waitakere Ranges, and that work needs to be done in partnership with the local board, the community, our users, and Te Kaurau Amaki. It's a series of it's a track network that's sort of developed over the last 100 years, and there's a degree of randomness to it. And certainly the advice we've got from our rangers is we can do better. We can certainly protect, lock up, close forever our most vulnerable areas in the Waitakere Ranges, and by redoing the track network that picks up exactly the issues you're raising, Sandra, we can come up with a more coherent and coordinated approach for the Waitakere Ranges. So this is not a short-term option. We need to deal with the emergency now and then work towards that. I think that's an absolutely critical piece of work. So just a few questions. Councillor Clow, Councillor Lee, and Member Blair. Councillor Clow.
And Greg, what would your definition of enforcement of closure? I mean, what are you envisaging? Because obviously there have been confrontations and all sorts of stuff going down already. So how far do you think we need to go?
I think we need a multi-layered approach to it. I think the Rahui serves a very helpful purpose, and maybe 15-20% of the population will abide by that, and I wish to say that I'm one of those. I've kept out of the forest ever since it was imposed. I think you need to go all the way. There needs to be persuasion, but I do think you need to go all the way to security guards patrolling the tracks to making sure that people don't use them. You will never keep 100% of people off the tracks, but the closer you get to that figure, the better for Kauri.
Thank you, Councillor Lee, for the question. it's actually very, very confusing the way it is right now. And so the recommended option is to close the forest and then look at what the exceptions might be. And the devil definitely is in the detail. And although you might have some tracks that don't have Cody on them, they may be higher up the hill than a grove of pristine Cody down in the valley. So there is potential then for somebody who's been walking in a diseased area to be walking that mud along a high track, and then eventually that mud getting down into the diseased area. It's just really, really important that we keep the message as clear as possible, and the clearest message we can say is just stop the use at the moment while we look at all the evidence, we take everything into consideration that we possibly can, and we use a really good, robust, precautionary approach to then decide how we may roll out the openings again. In terms of enforcement, the support from the government in terms of the controlled area notice, it will be essential, and also the level of enforcement will back up the clarity of the message. At the moment, if there's no teeth for the government, for the council to enforce the closure, then that muddies the message as well.
Can I just say, I'd just like to add to that. I mean, we've got a whole lot of beaches which are in regional parks or access through regional parks out there. We're not realistically going to be able to say to the people of Auckland, you can't visit the beach. And there are some tracks that lead off those beaches, which is what we're talking about, the coastal walkways that are a long way away from any kauri forests that can easily be segregated from the forested areas of the Waitakeris and treated separately. But there has to be a really much more serious attempt to get the messages out by putting up big signs. I mean, overall, we want to discourage people from going to the Waitakeris. That's the message. Because once they get out there, they're going to want to go somewhere. So better to stop them before they start off on the scenic drive. So there needs to be a kind of not just a single approach, but a number of things happening to give people alternatives. But it's kind of not feasible, Mike, to say to people you can't go to the beaches.
Okay.
But
I just
So
need
it's-
to hang on. Just let me referee this ARC colleagues' discussion.
But I think
I
Mike's
think
got
you
the
need to
wrong
just
end of the stick a
clarify it,
little bit.
Sandra.
So what we're saying is stop, close the forest, then develop a plan, then you know which tracks you're opening, and those will be a network of tracks that don't put kauri at risk. So that it's not a permanent close forever. It's a close while we do the work to
carry out those plans and those interventions, which is closing tracks is not going to help Whaitawhara at all, but in terms of the infected kauri, but you don't believe we can do those things at the same time. You have to stop everything and then plan and then start again. But we've been talking about this for 10 years at least.
I think that's where the board's come to that conclusion, because we've been trying to do things simultaneously, and what we've got there is a certain degree of chaos. It isn't working. And so we're trying to get that really simple message across. The Waitakeris are closed, and at some point in the future, hopefully before not too long away, we'll be able to tell people in a kind of a managed way where they can go and where they can't go. But trying to do the things simultaneously, the public's showing to us it's just too hard.
Thank you.
Thank you for Greg and your team. I just want to acknowledge publicly Denise Yates as a warrior of the West at this forum. E mihi atu ki aia, haere atu rā te wahine, moi atu ki o rangatira ki Tuatearai. So I just want to acknowledge her, and I hope that your board also recognises her in some form. At some point, I'd love to come along to that. I understand the enforcement measures like control area networks and security measures to close tracks, maybe replanting of those tracks that are permanently closed with trees. But also just wanted to see if you knew about all the schools that are not going to the Waitakeres, which is a great thing. They are respecting the Rahui. And also, I'm just wondering if you're aware of them, and perhaps they could be some form of, I don't know, a model for the future for adults who are less abiding by Rahui.
Yes, I was told by Arataki that I think something like 55% of school visits have been cancelled, specifically because of the Rahui and the disease, which is it's a wonderful show of support. And thank you for your words about Denise as well.
Kia ora.
For this, I think we'll move into the item proper. So thank you. And if there are issues that we need to clarify, I'll just call on you, Greg. So just while we get ready to start the item, Barry and team, I just want to make a couple of points. And there's no secret that this hasn't been an easy ride. I want to acknowledge our staff who have worked tirelessly on this issue for the last few years, and particularly the last few months, and relentlessly over the Christmas break. While other people were having breaks, our staff were out there in the field. They were monitoring, researching, talking to 30,000 visitors to the Waitakere Ranges, working with government and working on a way to take us to this next step. When we met in December, we said that we were going to do what we could to deal with this issue, but that we would come back in February, having looked at the effectiveness of the decisions we made in December, and that we would come back. And that's exactly what we're doing today. We're coming back having understood and looked closely at how Aucklanders, and mainly Aucklanders, we do talk a lot about visitors and foreigners and tourists, but this is an awful lot of Aucklanders and a lot of West Aucklanders and a lot of very local people who have chosen to completely ignore the Rahui, who've chosen completely to ignore the signs, and who've also chosen to completely ignore the phytosanitary stations, who are walking around it because they live there, so they don't need to do what we require of them. So it's very clear that we need to go the next step. We signalled what the next step would be in December, and we're now proposing the next step. We also are looking at getting tough as far as enforcement goes, and that's the next step that we talked about in December. It's no easy thing to try and keep people out of 17,000 hectares with 90 entrances into a very complex parkland that is also adjacent to privately owned land and well loved by 1 million Aucklanders a year. So we've tried to come up with the best solution we possibly can. I also want to acknowledge the Mayor and I and Councillor Filipaina have been in constant contact with Te Kawerau Amaki. Our staff have been meeting with Te Kawerau Amaki over the Christmas break, and as late as yesterday afternoon they were again with Edward from Te Kawerau Amaki. We've been keeping in touch with Te Warana and making sure that everything we do is done in partnership with the iwi, and you'll see from the recommendations that we've got that partnership process continues as we work out what exceptions there are. We will do it together with Te Kawerau. But I just want to make one point, and that can't be left out of this. We have some very stringent legal obligations, and we'll go into that in the item. We can't simply do what we please because we have people who earn a living from the ranges. We have businesses that operate in the ranges, and I know that people, and I can see some head shaking in the audience, we have a legal obligation to our concessionaires and our businesses, and we need to take that seriously and work in partnership with them. every conversation I've had with some of our key businesses in the ranges, they've made it very clear, and Bush and Beach are a shining example of this, that they will work with us to make sure that they abide by everything that we expect of them. But if they can keep their business going, that's a really good approach that we'd like to take, and remembering that is our legal obligation as well. So I just want us to hold that in our heads. And finally, I want to acknowledge the passion that's out there. We've got Mel's in the audience, who's been working again tirelessly over the Christmas break with the community on this issue. And whilst the community would have things happen immediately and have an entire closure, our obligations are not just to the Waitakere Rangers, but to the Hanuas as well, that are absolutely critical. And we also need to be working in with the government, MPI and DOC on their approach to the North Island Kauri Lands forest, which is an integrated whole. It doesn't stop and start at the Waitakere Ranges, and we need to make sure that what we do actually is robust, legal and enforceable, as well as practical. So on that note, I want to hand over to our staff with my huge appreciation for the extraordinary work done. And if you want to take us through the item, and then I know there will be lots of questions, but we are going to deal with this today, and we're going to deal with it in under an hour. Thank you.
Kia ora tātou. Thank you. With me, Barry Potter is my name. I'm Director of Infrastructure and Environmental Services. Phil Brown, who heads our biosecurity, and Rachel Keller, who heads our regional parks. And behind us, we've got legal advice and a number of other areas of advice that can respond to specific questions that might come up as we progress through. We've got a presentation here that, as the Chair noted, is this presentation, this meeting, is an outcome from our December, the committee's December meeting, where it was to look at options for stepped-up track improvements, upgrades, public education, enforcement options, effectiveness, and so on. So this is the outcome of that process that was set in place in December. And the things we're going to be looking at through our presentation, we'll look at what's been done in the last 2 months since that meeting in December, and also at the public response and how the public have reacted to the programs and to this. We'll also look at the government's response and some of the things that are happening there and are pending to happen that are in the wings that we are well aware of as we work with MPI and DOC primarily on this. Also, we'll then look at options for both Hanua and Waitakere Ranges, and we've covered both those off here, so we'll cover off those options. And it's important to understand that what we're looking for is guidance about what we go out and consult on. The nature of this is such, as the Chair noted, that we can't make a decision today about a course of action. We need some guidance. We need to know where you see we should be going, and that's what we then consult on. Because of the nature of this, the material nature of this decision, we would then come back on the 10th of April for a final decision with implementation of the outcomes of that likely in May. So that's the background that we're working in. Some other things that I think everyone is well aware of, the Kauri dieback is spreading across the region. Part of that is that we actually have a good handle on the data, and perhaps better than some others. So we know what's going on in our region, in our particular parks and so forth, but it is spreading right across the region. We're well aware that that some of the technical knowledge, the science around this is uncertain. And that's a challenge for us because we don't know a lot of things. We know some things, but not a lot of things. And that means that we're making decisions in an environment of science uncertainty. The priorities for the management of Kauri have been around reducing the spread from infected and uninfected areas. That's why we're going to look at the Hanua Ranges as well, and to protect healthy Kauri areas from infection. We know that it's doubled in the Waitakere Ranges in the last 5 years. That's a significant change, and that's because of our monitoring. We understand that and we track that closely. And and we have made significant allowance already in the document that's going out for consultation in our LTP document around protecting kauri and managing kauri dieback. So we'll pick up that as we go through this presentation. That's the background, and I'll hand over to Phil, who'll lead us through some of the things that are happening and some of the options.
Kia ora koutou. So obviously we know that in December, Te Kawerau Maki placed the Rahui over the ranges, and this committee responded by agreeing to initiating an increased program in the Waitakere ranges particularly. And as we heard from Councillor Hulse, we've been working regularly with Te Kawerau Maki since then. That was in the context of a really large park, 16,000 hectares, the Waitakere ranges, and over 1 million visitors per year. And of course, that's just one part of the whole regional picture, where we're dealing with many parks and lots of private land with Cody dieback, Cody that we want to protect from Cody dieback. And as Barry noted, we agreed that would come back to the committee today. So since then, by way of update, here are some of the key things that we've had underway on top of our normal program of work. So we closed those 44 tracks in the Waitakere ranges. We've been upgrading 6 tracks, about 15 kilometres worth of track there, and using over 200 tonnes of gravel to improve the surface to reduce the risk of Cody dieback spread along those tracks. We've improved a bunch of hygiene stations, from pretty simple ones to much more substantial stations. You can see there in the picture, in the top left picture there, one of the walk-through stations down at the track that leads up to Kirikiri Falls. We increased our ambassador program in the days following the committee meeting, so we did double the numbers from 6 ambassadors in the Waitakere ranges to about 12, so that we had around 20 operating across the region. And we've continued to monitor our closed tracks and get information back from our ambassadors about Aucklanders, well, visitors' attitudes towards the Rahui and also the Cody dieback protection measures. There's been a huge amount of engagement going on out there. We've had a really focused public engagement program, including releasing our maps with updated maps, and we've run multiple Our Auckland stories. We've run information about alternative destinations, so places you can go instead of the Waitakere ranges. We've had awareness videos running out. We've had paid online and social media campaigns, and we've updated a range of signs, installed new signs. You might have noticed there's been significant media interest in the issue, and certainly we've been proactive in pushing some of those messages out, but have also had to respond to a lot of media inquiries, and so it's been great to have that really high-profile media attention, public attention on this issue. Our 12 ambassadors in the Waitakere ranges alone, so there were other ambassadors too, they spoke to more than 30,000 visitors over the first couple of months that they were operating. And we'll hear a bit more about what they've heard in the next slide. But also note that we've kicked off a landscape-scale phosphite research program in the Waitakere ranges. It's a trial to inject individual trees that have Cody dieback with phosphite, which will help boost their immunity to it. It won't cure those trees, but it will hopefully reduce the advancement of the disease in those trees and keep them alive, at least in the medium term. And we're seeing how that could be rolled out over a larger area to protect more trees. And we're also looking to increase our feral pig control program when that comes back online in autumn. We don't tend to control the pigs over summer, but as that comes online, we'll do more than we had planned. So we've heard a real range of things from our ambassadors. It'd be fair to say that some of them have been a bit frustrated and disappointed by people's attitudes towards them and Cody dieback. So just quoting from a couple of them, to my surprise, Aucklanders are by far the worst type of visitor to the park. The level of ignorance on the Cody dieback, generally speaking, is very concerning. And I find that interesting, despite it being in the news and paper and across social media every day, that there's still a really high level of Cody dieback ignorance out there. Another one, locals are more or less going through the other side of the stream to avoid the station, as they're fed up with large numbers and probably us, the ambassadors. I chat with a lot of the compliant ones, but there is an animosity with others of them who opt to avoid at all costs. So there's some real challenges in getting the message across to visitors, and perhaps Aucklanders need to play their part too. I'd also note this weekend just gone, there was a large number of volunteers out and about, also pushing out messages about the rāhui and the importance of protecting Cody from Cody dieback. It's great to have that community drive too. So Auckland Council's part of a national governance group for the Cody dieback program, the National Cody dieback program, which is led by and coordinated by MPI. And that group recently announced plans for a national pest management plan for Cody dieback. That would get a more consistent approach across all Cody lands in New Zealand, so the northern part of New Zealand, but would take 18 to 24 months or so to develop and consult on. There's really clear requirements for consultation, and it could lead to some large changes in the way that Cody are managed across the country, so it will take some time to work through. They've also committed to establishing a strategic science advisory group, so that's to looking at ways that we can get more funding for the really big research questions that currently aren't being worked through. And we're working with the partners in that national governance group, particularly MPI and DOC, to develop a controlled area notice within Auckland. So that's an instrument under the Biosecurity Act I'll talk a bit more about, over either the Waitakere Ranges or the Hunua Ranges, or both, as we're proposing today. That could also cover DOC land, so DOC have agreed that it should cover certainly Goldie Bush, and we expect probably Mangatawhiri and Vinings reserves, Goldie Bush being just north of the Waitakere Ranges, and Mangatawhiri Vinings being the southern neighbour to the Hunua Ranges Regional Park. And it could potentially cover other iwi land or public land, so we've heard, for example, from Te Kawara Āmaki that they would like to have their land covered by the controlled area notice too. So in the Hunua Ranges, a controlled area notice could be placed over the native forest in the park. There's a range of other forestry and things in the park where we wouldn't try and control dirt in and out of. In the Waitakere Ranges, the controlled area notice could be placed over the area that we agree on today essentially, which might be all of the forested areas or whatever else the committee decides. Just to reiterate the point that controlled area notices can't be used specifically to close the park or to close specific tracks. It only controls the movement of risk materials into and out of a designated area. So in this case, we're talking about soil, and so the standard would be if you walk into one of our tracks or into the park and you go over that controlled area notice line, you'd have to have no visible soil on your footwear or any equipment you have with you. And where there's a hygiene station, then it would be mandatory to use that. And if you didn't abide by either of those things, then you'd be liable for prosecution. This would also provide us some more enforcement options for closed tracks. So we know that at the moment we have to rely on trespass notice, which has its limitations. We can use that, but it has its limitations. And potentially this would provide us an extra compliance tool. And it would still apply on open tracks, just to reiterate that too. So if you're going onto a track, you'd still be required to meet those minimum standards. And I'll hand over to Rachel to take us through some of the options.
So as we've heard, despite the efforts to date and the significant media attention, our current approach is not working. Aucklanders and visitors alike are ignoring those cleaning stations, the track closures, and also the general calls to respect the rāhui. So we do need to look at our options to ensure that we are containing the disease within the Waitakere Ranges, but also protecting healthy areas such as the Hunua Ranges. So following on from the December resolution, we've looked carefully at what additional measures we could take to increase our protection of those non-disease areas and to reduce the spread of the infection from infected sites. And we've got several options we're going to take you through today. So we've talked about the need to bring the Hunua Ranges into consideration. The Hunua Ranges is one of our most significant ecological areas in the Auckland mainland region, and it contains, to this time, no known infection or incidents of Cody dieback disease. And it's really important that when we're making decisions about a site like Waitakere that we couple that with the balance and consideration around Hanua. You can appreciate that a lot of the recreational activity that happens in Waitakere is similar to the type of recreational opportunity in Hanua. And we don't want that perverse outcome of pushing people from Waitakere into Hanua without the right kind of measures to ensure that the disease doesn't travel into that important site. So what we're proposing for the Hanua Ranges, and it's consistent across both of the two options that we're putting forward today, is more protection through increased closure of higher risk tracks. This would require further consultation with Mana Whenua and the Franklin Local Board. We would also be looking at requesting that a controlled area notice go over the top of that forested area, and we'd be looking at an enforcement program to support that. There'd be the potential for reopenings of some of those closed tracks once they've been subject to upgrades or potentially rerouting away from Cody areas. One of the benefits of the Hanua Ranges is it is slightly different geology from Waitakere's. The track network doesn't traverse the Cody areas quite to the same extent that it does in Waitakere. And we've also done quite a bit of work to date to actually reroute and close tracks from those significant Cody areas. In the Waitakere Ranges, we've got three options to talk through. The first option is status quo, so that's the continued program of high and medium track closures and upgrades planned as part of the proposed 10-year budget. The second option is the proposed closure of Cody Forest Areas, with some exceptions. And then the third option is proposed closure of all forested areas, with some exceptions, and that's the recommended option. So just to talk you through those different options in a little bit more detail. So what we were talking about here for the Hanua Ranges is to close a small number of high-risk tracks in Cody lands that are not already at a high standard. As I've said, this would potentially be supported by a controlled area notice. This wouldn't impact on grazing areas, the water care infrastructure, exotic forestry and private property. There would still be many tracks for visitors open, and the compliance strategy that we would put in place would be more focused around education and awareness. So there is a slight difference with the two strategies that we would adopt for compliance, because the Hanua Ranges, as I said, is disease-free. What really matters for that site is that we're not taking infected soil into the site. Bringing soil out is not so much of an issue, it's really we don't want to take it in. So that's where your education and awareness, that campaign of making sure people know that before they actually go to the Hanua Ranges, they need to make sure that their gear and equipment is clean, free of soil. And tracks could be reopened, like I said, once upgraded or rerouted. So option one with respect to Waitakere Ranges is essentially the status quo. So current closures would remain in place. In December, we identified a number of tracks that we thought could be closed effective immediately, and we've gone well above and beyond those original list of closed tracks. So we now have 44 tracks that are closed. We've also permanently disestablished 9 tracks that provided access to our most significant Cody ecosystem areas. And this option would continue to be supported through that broader regional program, the use of ambassadors, the upgrading of hygiene stations, our general communication and education work that we do to protect Cody areas generally across the region. Track upgrades then could be planned as part of the proposed 10-year budget that's going out for consultation. So it's difficult to see at this scale, but hopefully you've got maps in front of you. This is the map that shows the current state in terms of the open and closed tracks, green being the open tracks, orange being those that are currently temporarily closed, and the darker coloured tracks, those that have now been permanently disestablished. So that means all sign of those tracks has been removed, signage has been taken away, track markers are gone, and the entry points to those tracks have been disguised with vegetation, etc. So the second option that we have here is the closure of Cody Forest Areas with some exceptions. So this proposal would be to close those Cody Forest ecosystem areas. So that's essentially the majority of the forested area, minus about 800 metres of a coastal strip. So that coastal strip is forests that are dominated by trees such as Pahutakawa, and that's been informed by our ecosystem information pulled together through our biodiversity group. Potential for some tracks to remain open inside that closed area where visitors are able to meet the standard required for a controlled area notice. And some examples, just to give you some context, would be sites like the Arataki Nature Trail. It's got a well-formed track surface. We're confident that the combination of the track surface plus the hygiene station would mean that people could enter into that area and come off that track and be able to clean their shoes to a level that they would meet that controlled area notice standard. The closure would not apply to beaches or pasture lands, and it would not close essential service areas or prevent authorised management activity. So just to give you an idea what that option 2 would look like, so that's just the closure of the Cody Forest ecosystem areas. The dark green on that map up on the screen there is the area that would be subject to the closure. The lighter green shows you the area that would remain open as part of that option. The third option is to close the forested areas of the Waitakere Ranges, so that's regardless of whether they're Cody Forest or not. Again, there would potentially be some exceptions, so we would close that whole forested area. As per the same in option 2, there would be potential for some tracks to remain open where visitors can meet that standard required by the controlled area notice. Again, it wouldn't apply to beaches and pasture lands, and it would not close those essential service access areas or prevent management activity. This option would provide the highest level of Cody protection, but I think, and it is the recommended option that we're putting forward today, I think it's fair to say that there is a reasonably marginal benefit between option 2 and 3. The benefit being that in this option you close all forested areas. In the previous option 2, under that scenario of keeping some of those coastal forests open, there are still some pockets of Cody tree through those coastal forests. So while they're not dominated by Cody and they're not technically Cody forests, there are still pockets of Cody through those coastal strips. So that's the point that needs to be made clear between those two different options. What it does do though, option 2 does provide greater ability for people to recreate in that coastal margin, and there certainly are areas through that coastal strip where there are no Cody present. The benefit of the third option is, like I said, it would provide the highest level of protection, even though potentially that's not substantially different from option 2, but it would also help remove the ambiguity around what was closed and what was open, and I think that's worth noting. So this map here shows you the extent to which we'd be talking about if we went with option 3, so that dark green represents the majority of all the forested areas mapped at this level.
Okay, so the financial impact of these different options is not small. So in the first 12 months, we think that there are roughly $900,000 worth of operational costs that would need to be brought to bear. That include things like materials for actually closing tracks and car parks. There'd be revenue losses, potentially business compensation, a significant communications cost in order to get, the message out to all visitors, all Aucklanders, and further afield, as well as all the increased signage and what have you that would be required, all the changed signage that would be required to get that message across, as well as other monitoring costs. So just a few points there. We have no budget for that this financial year. There's some of the costs will be shared with MPI, particularly, well, probably only actually around communications and engagement, but it's not fully clear to us yet how much of that cost share there will be, but that's a significant investment that will be required in there. And then in addition to those operational costs, there'll be the enforcement costs required, and of course they'll be dependent on the compliance approach we take. So, for example, if we took an education-only approach and we had just ambassadors out and about, discouraging people from using the tracks but not really doing any enforcement work, then it might cost perhaps $250,000, $300,000 for each of the Waitakere ranges and the Hunua ranges if we went to town on that. But we don't think that would really achieve the outcomes that we'd be seeking. If we took a more targeted patrols approach, and a targeted patrol is where we'd have, well, I'll define that better, is where we would have static compliance staff or contractors at perhaps the top 10 kind of tracks on some sort of rotational basis across both the Hunua Ranges and the Waitakere Ranges, as well as some compliance staff or contractors that would be roving in vehicles. So we'd have a blitz up front for perhaps 4 weeks, and then have still quite a significant presence, particularly through summer, particularly on weekends and public holidays, but a reduced presence across parts of winter, and certainly winter weekdays wouldn't be there quite so much. That kind of thing we've costed out in our high-level design at over $1 million each for both the Waitakere Ranges and the Hunua Ranges. If we went into a higher again level, which is essentially that was the baseline level of patrols and enforcement, but we kept a more constant presence across the whole year, then which we've called periodic patrols. Then we're talking about perhaps $2 million for each of the Waitakere Ranges and the Hunua Ranges in a 12-month period. And then in order to achieve a more than 95% compliance sort of rate, we think it would cost in the order of $20 million a year across both of those places. And so we haven't done any further analysis on that option because that seemed to be clearly unattainable. Sorry, I'd just like to make a couple other points about that. So I see we've done a high-level design, and certainly we'll be looking for every efficiency that we can find as we move into a more detailed design phase, should this committee agree to option 2 or 3. We have costed this on the basis that we don't have staff capacity to deliver this kind of really intense effort. We know that there'll be a really high expectation that if we effectively close the Waitakere Ranges or large parts of it, that we will be highly visible and that we will be stopping people from going in there. We feel that we can't just go in with a very low-key kind of approach. But as we do the detailed design, it might be that we can incorporate more staff through the program. And I'd also note that one of the reasons these costs are quite high is because in order to enforce a controlled area notice, you actually need to be present there at the hygiene station to see whether people or not are actually complying. We can't have the rangers who are working on the tracks or doing their daily business just sat at the track entrances. They would stop their daily business, so we'd need to make sure that there was actually some sort of static presence there. And then it wouldn't just be an enforcement approach, of course. We've already got some behaviour change programs running under the proposed 10-year budget. We'd have a larger behaviour change and engagement program running. And some of those communication and engagement costs are also about behaviour change. And so it wouldn't be solely enforcement. So if we do go down this road there, I wanted just to have a look at what the impact on our long-term plan 10-year budget proposals might be. Just to remind you that under option A, there's around $8.8 million per annum for Cody dieback. Under option B, there would be around $10 million per annum for Cody dieback. So if we assume that we're doing those targeted patrols, and so it's going to cost $1 million for each of Waitakere Ranges and the Hunua Ranges, and then another around about $900,000 or so for the operational costs. We're talking in the order of $3 million. That would need to come out of an $8.8 million per annum budget. To make that work, we haven't costed this into our proposal as it's going to be consulted on. We'd need to significantly reduce the track upgrade and station upgrade program. And so that might be in the order of reducing that by $2 million per annum. And then further trim a range of other Cody dieback programs, to more than $1 million probably worth, which would include things like reduced washdown facilities, reduced surveillance, reduced research, reduced landowner support for Cody dieback management. So the impact could be, perversely, that we do increase the risk of spread in other parts of the region by having a less tied together plan. It would also mean that if we had to, if we only got money from option A and did that targeted approach, we'd find that we'd have such a low track upgrade budget or track maintenance budget that many tracks would need to remain closed. And it would also cause significant disruption to the Hunua recreational opportunities by not having that extra money. Under option B, we'd have a bit more leeway, of course, and again, we'd have to sit down and do the detailed design recast of that, well thought through integrated program that we had set up, depending on what the outcome of today's meeting is. So just wanted to note about the mana whenua discussions we've been having. So as we've heard, Cody's a keystone species. We've been discussing with this program a lot with Te Kawerau-a-Maki, and Councillor Hulse mentioned the rangatira ki te rangatira kōrero that's been going on. Certainly we've been meeting with Te Kawerau-a-Maki operationally to progress additional closures and exceptions and talk through the issues. And we've got planned discussions with the southern iwi that have particular interest in around Whenua ranges, so Ngāi ki Tamaki, Ngāti Whanaunga, Ngāti Pawa and Ngāti Tamaoho. And we were going to meet yesterday, but that turned out not to be possible, and so we're still looking for a date that will suit. And just like to reiterate that a decision today is really a decision to continue with the consultation that we have got underway because of the significance of the decision.
Thanks, Phil. Perhaps I might just go back to a slide and clarify something in case it's causing confusion, because that table there looks different to the table in the report. It's actually the same table and the numbers are consistent. It's just that the two columns under the Waitakere Ranges have been swapped. So exactly the same numbers, same table, just a clarification in case you might have thought they were different. So in terms of, and Phil has mentioned this, we've mentioned a couple of times, that this is a decision about going out to consult today, and the nature of that consultation with a final decision in April, and the consultation is a requirement under various acts, and we have, I think, we do have Dani Gardner with us, who can, if there are questions around the nature of that consultation and the reasons to it, she can help us through those. So that's an overview of where we're at. We are looking for guidance about that consultation process and keen to take questions.
A couple of questions, Barry. The first one was, if we get 95% from full enforcement, what's your estimate for the other less expensive options?
Of course, it's really hard to know exactly what the compliance would be like, but we did talk this through with our compliance team and council. They said we're a law-abiding bunch in New Zealand, and so they think that perhaps under that targeted approach would get at least an 80% compliance, maybe higher. If we had a really clear message and we're sending people away from the Waitakere Ranges, for example, that will reduce the non-compliance. And if we also provide some opportunities still for people to walk in the ranges, those exceptions we talked about where people can still use some tracks that meet the required standards, then that might discourage people from using the closed tracks as well.
Perhaps if I just may add to that too, of course, one of these things, you really got to try it and see what the response is, and it's very difficult to predict here, what kind of compliance we will get for what kind of investment, and it may be that the nature of that compliance program changes over time, that early on it might need a heavy hit, and then you might be able to back, and so it's one of those things that's very difficult to know right now what level you need until the program starts, and what compliance might actually be achieved.
I've got two other quick questions just based on your presentation. Canyoning and off-track activities, the local board is asking for that to be stopped. Is that part of this, that it will be stopped?
I think the extent to which any activities are shut depends on which exceptions we work through as part of that consultation process. So certainly I think that's a conversation we need to be having, and we'll be speaking to mana whenua, we'll be talking to recreational user groups, we'll be talking to the concessionaires, and what we're proposing is that activity that could meet the controlled area notice standard, so those strict hygiene measures potentially could continue, but those activities that couldn't would be the ones that we would certainly be looking at ruling out.
And just on that, it's a nice segue into the last one. What's your estimate for compensation at the moment within the budget you're asking for? Again, I did that because I do understand it will be like that.
So again, I think in terms of So the question around compensation specific to our concessionaires, we know that we get about 80,000 per annum for our recreational and other concessionaires that use the Waitakere Ranges Regional Park. It's not possible to tell you exactly what the compensation payout might be for those concessionaires that were unable to continue operating under this eventual outcome, because we don't know what that would look like yet. There's potential for some concessionaires to still be able to continue with their activities on some of those exceptional tracks, but until we work through that process of confirming what those are, we don't know what the ultimate impact would be.
And perhaps if I could just add on to that, consultation is a process for working through this, and whether it's compensation or not is one of those things, of course, that needs to be considered. So,
Right, Councillor Casey? I'll just let you know we've got Councillor Hills, Mayor Goff, Fletcher, Walker, Philippiana, Member Blair and Councillor Lee. We're just questions at this stage, and then Councillor Cooper and Member Brown, and then we'll move to the actual debate. And we're doing well. We're 33 minutes in. Councillor Hills.
Cool. Thank you, Chair. Just a few quick questions. So with the LTP, the proposal for the targeted rate, we're going to have 88 million or 100 million over the 10-year budget for Cody dieback. What was that in the last 10-year budget? Is my first question.
It's not quite apples with apples, but we have around $3 million over the 10 years in cash OPEX, as well as some staff time. So we're estimating that under the current LTP we're operating in now, it's around about $5 million over those 10 years.
So 5 million to 88 million. The next question is, so what was your experience? So would that be wiped out by the full, that would basically be wiped out with the full compliance of the...
Yeah, absolutely. If we went really to town on compliance, then that would use up the entire LTP and then some, the entire proposal and then some.
For the target rate. The other thing is...
If I can just add on to that, in the LTP that's going out to consult, there's a good chunk of CapEx in there for track improvements and so forth, and that may move through from reduction in track improvement through to the operation, to OPEX spend.
The other question is, what is the experience of... So we've had some... I've heard a lot of anecdotal evidence that even with fences up and like no entry, people are still using those tracks.
So we've got monitoring devices out now across 21 tracks, so 21 of the closed tracks, and it's too early to be able to give you an absolute precise picture around what's happening on those tracks, but suffice to say they are still being used to some extent. So there's still, and that ranges from very low use on some tracks through to high use on others of those closed tracks. In our experience, what we see is that in some instances it doesn't really matter what barrier you put in place. Some people will always be determined and find their way around it. There are a good proportion of the public that will actually respect a closure and will stay away. Our current measures include large signs erected in the middle of the track entry point saying that the track's closed for Cody protection, and on a number of tracks we've also got physical barriers across those entry points, so timber railing, fencing. But certainly we find a mixture of compliance around those types of things. Some people will walk around a track, walk around a sign. They'll also equally cross over a gate or a fence.
The other one, so obviously with the controlled area notice, it actually gives us the ability to do something. But what would that look like? Is it a fine, or is it, what is...
So unfortunately, it's not possible to give fines under the Biosecurity Act at the moment, and so it would require us to take a prosecution. The deal is that the Auckland Council is an operational partner of the National Governance Group and Program, is responsible for the operational work, so actually doing the enforcement work on the ground, but then MPI would end up actually taking the prosecution. And they think that through developing that national pest management plan, we're likely to be in a position in a couple of years' time to be able to have fines, but that's just not a tool available to us at the moment.
I might just add to that. So just to clarify, there's two different tools that would be available to us under these scenarios. So if we were looking to close Cody Forest or the forested areas, we would do that as a landowner. So under our landowner provisions, we can close those areas. So if we found someone in a closed area, then we have the opportunity to ask them to leave, and ultimately we could go through a trespass process with them. In addition to that, we've got the potential to use the controlled area notice under the Biosecurity Act. They would be used in slightly different ways because the controlled area notice requires you to actually catch someone at the point of control. So that's useful if you're actually finding someone crossing through a hygiene station and not cleaning their shoes or walking in with muddy footwear. It doesn't help you necessarily when you find someone well within the park, well away from a cleaning station, because you're not going to be able to have that conversation around, well, did you bring that mud in with you, or have you just picked it up as you've gone? So that's where the ability to have both those tools, closure as a landowner and the controlled area notice, gives us a bit more arsenal to use, and they're not quite the same thing, but would be complementary.
And the very last, sorry, Madam Chair, in Kaipatiki, as you saw in one of the earlier presentations, we have 30% tree coverage, but we have a lot of Cody. We have Cody Point Centennial, we have Cody Glen, we have massive Cody even in the reserve just near my house. I know we've got a big plan for Hunua, but is there going to be targeted approaches? And I know the local board is really concerned about that in Kaipatiki.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're, I guess, focused on walking before we run. So we've already got a program that's running across Kaipatiki and other parts of the region. And I'm quite aware that Pest Free Kaipatiki recently wrote to the council and been in touch with the board about opportunities to step that up further. So that's certainly on our radar and on our plans to be in touch again about how we might do that over the next couple of weeks. But Kaipatiki is not the only place that there's lots of Cody as well, and so we're looking at stepping these things out in Waitakere and Hunua first, learning all that we can from the process, and then looking to continue to expand.
Once on that, it's covered.
I guess that's for the committee to determine now.
Okay. So I've just got Margoff, Fletcher, Walker, Philippina, Lee, Cooper and Brown, and I just want to ask people to keep their questions, and Chloe, can we keep the questions very focused, and can we keep the answers short, because we then need to get to the debate over the next 5 minutes. Margoff.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to follow on from Councillor Hills, because I thought those were important questions. When we talk about targeted patrols and periodic patrols of full enforcement, what power do our rangers or other people have to actually physically stop a person from entering an area?
Limited powers to physically stop people. They can apply enforcement, but cannot arrest or detain.
So I imagine we're not just, when we're talking about patrols, we're not just talking about rangers, because they've got wider roles. So effectively, the difficulty with the patrols is they can stop people and tell them they shouldn't be there, but they have very limited ability to actually do anything about it. If they said, no, we're walking down to the falls, and tough luck.
While that's true, I think there's still an opportunity to make examples of some people through the prosecution process, and I suspect that might change people's attitudes.
And that leads to your answer on the what are the consequences of non-compliance? It seems that the controlled area notices are going to be, unless you stop them at the point of entry, they're very limited in effect. Everybody thinks that this is some big prohibition order. It's not. The trespass process or the prosecution, I mean, how effective do you think they are going to be, and what's the cost per prosecution to actually enforce in that sense?
We haven't troubled ourselves too much about the cost for prosecution because MPI will be carrying that, so not terribly worried ourselves. clearly we can't be prosecuting every person that doesn't abide by the controlled area notice or goes in the closed areas. But we do have powers under the trespass provisions that are, serious police matters, and again under the Biosecurity Act, which could lead to fines in court of over $100,000. And we think that we have enough power to make a significant difference in the number of visitors to the park and therefore the risk of spreading Cody dieback.
And we could request a change in legislation to give infringement fine powers, but that would probably take about a year. But it's our intention to do that, I presume?
Yes, absolutely. So that's been on the table with MPI. We've been talking through those sorts of opportunities.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My other question is about option 2 and option 3. And I noticed Rachel said, and I think she's right, that there's a substantial, that they're not substantially different. But my question is this, on the basis that compliance powers are constrained, we have to have, the biggest strength we have is the credibility and acceptability of what we're requiring the public to do. Under that criterion, if you look at the the 3 examples you've given under option 2, Arataki, Waitakere Dam and Dreamlands tracks, you deem those at the moment to be substantially free of risk. So under option 3, are we liable to be in the position where we are closing tracks at the ab initio, which we've already deemed to be substantially safe to use, because that may affect our credibility? And if that is the case, could we quite quickly, okay, go for option 3, close it off, but then quite quickly move and say, but these are the exceptions, because we've got 1 million people trying to get into the park, these are the exceptions that we can open, actually effectively leave open by the time we close the rest of the forested area off.
So to answer that question, yes, that's the scenario that we're envisaging, and that would apply to both option 2 and 3. What we're proposing is a start date of closure effective from 1 May, but we would have those exceptions clearly understood as part of that. Yes. Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's at the heart of, if everyone understood that question, that answer, that is exactly the point we're trying to reach. Councillor Fletcher. Oh, no, we'll go back to Councillor Fletcher. Councillor Walker.
Got a couple of questions, and I guess the first one is around other options. Given that what we're talking about here is a national disaster, there's a huge amount of public interest, and we have cell phone technology, solar voltaics, technology that enables us to have cameras for the public to view. Why aren't we doing that? So that effectively the public of Auckland is going to be looking and watching people.
So I think there's, certainly that concept of naming and shaming is something that's popped up when we've been looking at the enforcement approach, but we need to be careful that we are respecting people's legal rights through that process. So that's something that we will look at. We are using video camera technology at the moment for some of our monitoring, because that gives us a different way of seeing, who is ignoring some of the closures, a bit more than just a track counter which tells us that someone's passed an entry point. The other aspect around why aren't we doing that is sort of a live streaming opportunity. There are challenges with getting that kind of video camera footage uploaded and channeled in a way that's accessible in a sort of a cheap and effective manner, but those are things that we're certainly looking at as part of the enforcement and compliance approach.
I guess my concern is, why isn't that information being made available to us now? Given that the technology exists, it's a public place, there's huge interest, it's a national disaster, we need to be quick, and everybody's got these. And we could have apps, for example, so that as soon as you go into the Waitakeres, it pops up and people know.
I think, Councillor, we're not ruling any of that out. The point that we need to get our staff to is that we are clear and unequivocal about what it is that we're wanting them to achieve. Secondly, that they have a budget to go and do this stuff. And thirdly, when we come back in April, that's a chance perhaps to talk about what apps might be available. But I'm very keen that we get to the stage where we actually give clear, unequivocal instructions to our staff that our community can understand. So don't be too frustrated. We can come back with some of that.
I understand where you're coming from, Madam Chair. My concern is that the suggestions that I'm making may well be very economical, could well be sponsored, could happen very quickly, are scalable, because this is just not an Auckland issue, it's a very widespread issue. Kaupatiki, Auckland, Northland. Okay, so didn't really get an answer, but I'm hoping that we'll get some reporting back on that. The other question I've got is around the breadth of other legal mechanisms and other mechanisms that could be applied. For example, using the restricted place notice method, which we don't have information on, and that has been used in regional parks before, can be nimble, can be quick, can be cheap. Other issues like Part 7 of the Biosecurity Act that could also be enacted, emergency powers, for example. So my questions are really around other areas where I would suggest we could and should be getting information.
Sure, I can briefly answer that. So, controlled area notice is, well, restricted place notice has been reviewed as a tool, but the controlled area notice is the better tool for this kind of situation. And we're working with MPI towards getting that in place, so I'm quite comfortable with that. We're also quite clear that that Cody dieback doesn't tick all the boxes for an emergency requirement under the Act. And so, yeah, as part of the regulatory review that MPI and the national group did in 2015, controlled area notices and a national pest management plan are the preferred approach, and so we're keen to pursue those.
Through you, Madam Chair, I understand the response. My concern is that we should have information around all the tools we've got, rather than a circumstance where things are being closed off and we're not being made aware of them, or the public for that matter. So that's my concern, Madam Chair, that goes to this issue as a whole that is unfolding as a disaster, and that includes MPI and its role.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not going to be able to stay for the entire debate, so I hope you'll just indulge me in acknowledging that in December I was quite aggrieved that I felt that we didn't have sufficient information, and I want to acknowledge the work that you've undertaken to actually be able to bring the fulsome reports that we are considering today. I have a few questions, if I may, I'd just like to pose. Firstly, it's really refreshing to see the parks and the biosecurity teams here. It's very good to see people working in unison. I guess I've always had a high regard for Jack Craw, and Jack has taken such a passionate interest in this. You will be familiar with the letter that he sent to councillors earlier this week. Can you help me, because I haven't got much time and I've got to go, can you tell me where within option 3 there would be variation between those recommendations that Jack put forward by way of possible actions by the council?
Sorry, Councillor Fletcher, can you just repeat and clarify the question?
There was the letter that was sent on Monday to councillors by Jack Craw, and I'm looking at the options that we've actually got before us today, and I'm looking for how they align. So I'm looking to understand how option 3 might align with those actions that Jack had been putting to us for our consideration.
Councillor Fletcher, we've got the staff at a bit of a disadvantage because the letter only went to councillors as a confidential letter to councillors. So I'm wondering how we can help you quickly. I just wondered, Dean, did you want to make a comment?
Yes, so just to make a brief comment, that was a confidential email to councillors. It wasn't given to staff, although some staff have access to that email. There's some concern about some of the content in that correspondence with you. Matters that we disagree with quite strongly, so we'll be going back to Jack to review those. In terms of his proposal, or one of his comments around methods of managing it, I think we just need to stick with the staff's advice at this stage. They've considered those options, a number of which Jack also pursues in his email. But my preference would not be to use that as an input for today's discussion. It's inappropriate.
Thank you. I would have liked to have actually spent a bit more time on compliance issues, but I'll park that because I think others have explored that. Secondly, what is the wider council family's policy on compensation? I know that through transport issues at times when we have major roadworks and inconvenience, there has been a resistance to look at matters of compensation, and I wonder whether we have wider council policy on this.
That feels like a, a question to me, unless there's... I might... Pardon me?
My question
yeah,
was
yeah.
to you, Mr.
Look,
Director.
I thought as much. Look, the matter of compensation is always a very tricky one. And we face this a lot across Auckland. That question is asked of us. We have to look carefully at our obligations or commitments. In this case, we've talked about concessionaires, where we have a legal contract to make part of our space available to them in return for some royalty. So that would be an example where I think we would need to have a discussion around what level of compensation or alternatives exist. And you've already heard Rachel talk to that. So clearly we don't want to put the ratepayers at any more risk around payment than what is appropriate or fair. So we'll always look at it through that lens, and we'll have a look at it where we have a contract arrangement that needs to be honoured. So that's probably about as close as I can go at this stage, Councillor Fletcher, but we get a lot of requests across all of Auckland at different times for compensation, and we always look at it in that context.
Madam Chair, I do regret that I can't remain for the debate. Again, I want to acknowledge the staff who have brought some really important and comprehensive work together, and I'd like to acknowledge you for bringing this before us, and it's my hope that councillors can vote to do the responsible thing today. This is not a matter for partisan views. This is something that is going to impact on all of our futures, particularly those of our grandchildren, and I hope that we can find a united position today that will be in the best interest of Auckland and New Zealand Inc. So thank you.
Thank you.
I also want to acknowledge you, Chair and Deputy, and all the staff for working hard over the past couple of months to get it to this point. But also want to acknowledge the Te Kawerā Maki and the many conservation groups that have kept up a vigilant campaign to save the Cody that are here today. Barry, you talked about effective consultation. Did you want some guidance from me on consulting with Māori, or did you have your own quality consultation?
I'm always keen to receive guidance.
Kia ora. Okay, with that opportunity, I'd say it needs to be at the front end, right at the start. The iwi have centuries of knowledge that can guide contemporary decision making. So quality consultation, and also to be able to resource it so that they can provide you with quality, because as you know, the iwi are challenged in terms of their workload. So in order for that, I'd say it needs to be meaningful in terms of your engagement with Te Kawerā Maki. There's a famous saying that Peter Sharple said that we're no longer the last cab in the rank, so we'd park it up the front if we can. And I'm here to help too, if you want to, and same with our IMSB members. The second question I've got is, have you considered the iwi as part of your targeted patrol measures to assist there?
Certainly we haven't determined what the makeup of that would be. We've costed it on the basis that we're contracting in some sort of security kind of force, but When we do the detailed design, absolutely would be looking at how iwi and staff and volunteers could all play their parts in that program.
Okay, thank you. And the third one, just if I may, the communication plan is mentioned in here. There's been a huge groundswell of non-Māori that have been behind this. Are you looking at engaging with them and also the school groups and the kids to change their parents' behaviour?
Absolutely, and we already are doing work with schools. Christine Rose is funded through the Waitakere Rangers local board and is regularly working with schools. We're developing further behaviour change program going beyond signs and brochures, working with some international specialists on that too to see how we can actually really change people's attitudes and behaviour in this kind of space.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, very clearly we're dealing with a ravaging contagious disease and an epidemic really as regards kauri. And from time to time all living organisms are attacked in this way. In order to treat these sorts of contagions, two steps are normally taken. One is to quarantine and to stop the spread of the infection or slow it down. And all of our work seems to be focused on that, not too effectively thus far. But in terms of treatment, I see virtually nothing in here at all about treating or investing in research to treat the organism. Could you just take us through the costings again, because I have to say it's a little bit confusing. You say here under G, note that if either of the proposed long-term plan environmental protection options are adopted, that this additional expenditure represents about 1/3 of the proposed kauri dieback investment. Okay, I've got that, and will be prioritised above track improvements, upgrades, and other aspects of the program, such as landowner support, station upgrades, and washdown facilities. All of those costings, which we are being told will be downgraded in priority, are again part of a quarantine mechanism. They're not part of a treatment. The only hint of treatment that I can see is phosphite research. Well, phosphite is not really research. It's treatment that in a rough and ready low-tech way has been shown to work. And so I think we need to at least treat that as, or deal with that as a form of treatment. But you know, I don't see any stuff here about investing in mycologists and people who actually can tackle the disease itself. It's all to do with essentially locking people out. So
should we have a
can
crack
you
at the
explain
answer?
what in terms of what we're sacrificing here out of our budget to spend on ambassadors and security guards, a huge, probably the biggest policing effort in Auckland's history. What are we sacrificing, not just in track improvements, but in treatment and direct research?
So we have a very modest research budget proposal because it's quite clear that that the central government have responsibility for running that science program. MPI in charge of delivering that stuff. The Strategic Science Advisory Group that I mentioned earlier that has just been committed to is designed to pull out exactly that kind of research that hasn't been happening on things like a cure, a treatment, and find new money to fund that kind of work, which we recognise is important, but not within Auckland Council's particular
So it's not budgeted for? We're not doing any of it?
Perhaps if I respond to that as well, MPI have made it very clear to us that research, they want to fully fund that. They see that as their role in this. We are working joined up across completely with MPI and DOC on this. So the research is being done and will be stepped up, and we'll be working with MPI, and it will be their budget that funds that research. So we haven't included research in our budget. Our budget is enforcement. They've made that clear that will be local government.
You see, my concern is that the confused efforts so far with the council targeting sensitive areas and tracks and closing them has, and the Kaurau Maki's Rahui, those two things have caused quite a lot of confusion. It's even within this report, it implies that we actually have been supporting the Rahui, but we've been supporting a targeted closure of tracks. The public haven't been evidently very responsive. Do you not think that the public would be more responsive if they could see or get some idea what we're actually doing to treat the problem, rather than just locking them out? Us doing it, not waiting for MPI. They've had 10 years to get involved and they haven't.
It might be worth just reiterating the fact that we paid for and have done the research that has identified the level of the problem in the Waitakere Ranges. We now have the ability to work in partnership with government, and they will quite rightly pay for the ongoing research. The critical issue here is we've also got the partnership with Te Kaurau Amaki, who have been asked to join the technical support group on this, and we have, as one of the recommendations that government and the governmental groups are pushing, is the collective group of scientists who are going to come together and work on this. So I think, Councillor Lee, we would be foolish to agree to fully fund something that actually, finally, the government is taking charge of. Your point's well made. We just need to get out there. If we can finally get some clear air in the media and be listened to, we've been explaining to them what we're doing. It's been ignored. Hopefully, after today, we might get the chance to do that. Madam Chair, when it comes to Dutch elm disease, we are very active and targeting getting to the core of the problem. There are a number of things we could actually do and should be doing rather than just locking people out. That's not going to solve the problem, is it? All right, we've got two more questions and then I'm going to move the recommendation. Councillor.
Ask, was it still question time? So I've got a couple of questions. One, because we've just got this morning, and I understand why, it's just been a bit tricky to try and get through it and listen at the same time. So some of my questions might seem a bit silly, but I just want to get real clarity. One is around, if we went to the full enforcement model, even though we can't touch anybody, ask for their name, do anything with them, and actually physically stop people. We've got 90 entrances. I'm just wondering, is this full enforcement going to cover, for example, I drove out to Whatapu a couple of weeks ago, 16k from around Huia. I could have stopped anywhere on the track and just walked in, with the right equipment, of course. Is full enforcement going to cover those just roads, or are we still going to have breaches?
Yeah, absolutely. If people are determined to walk up into the ranges, we're not going to be, linked arms around the whole ranges. But the intention under that kind of option is you'd have quite a few patrols patrolling, and you'd, perhaps see cars parked and, wait for the people to come out or whatever. But you can't stop everyone, unfortunately.
I wouldn't do it with my little named car. So the other thing is, and I wouldn't do it. The other thing is around the business. And it kind of goes into, we've got I'm just feeling like we're conflating the LTP discussion and what we're supposed to be, what we're going to decide to do today, and that's why I'm struggling a bit. And I didn't expect that to be in this report. So is it clear that we're going to decide to do some more today, and then also go out to consult, or are we going to make this decision today and then go, oh, we'll go and consult whether we're going to do what we've decided to do? That's my confusion here. Because it is hard to follow. There's no choose option 1, 2 in here, and then it doesn't align with this and the other bits on the report. And I understand there's been a lot of hard work here. It just doesn't make it super clear.
We might just ask Dani to give a bit more clarity around the consultation processes and for both LTP.
And perhaps I can just make a point before we do, that I guess we wanted to be clear that this is an option that we're putting towards you, but we do not have this budgeted in our current financial year nor next financial year. But obviously there's all this discussion about the long-term plan proposal, and so we just wanted to highlight the impact there might be.
Just so I'm clear when I'm voting, because I like the idea, yes, we're going to consult with the concessionaires, we're going to give them time, we're not going to suddenly just stop their business. We have legal obligations with their concessions, but also that what we decide today, we've still got money to do more than what we've been doing. That's the clarity I want.
That's correct.
Until we get, hopefully, that environmental targeted rate budgeted for.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep, we don't have the money for the period between now and the end of the financial year to do this. Yep, some budgeted.
Just, I think your
Depending
question's
on the
a
outcome
really
and
good
the-
one, Councillor
depending on the
Cooper.
outcome of,
If you have a look at the recommendations, and we have done these in a hurry, the point is we now have the month, which Dani will touch on, around consultations. Some of this will assist us in getting a little bit clearer on the cost of the patrols and enforcement approach. So, you know, this is, in principle, we're just trying to put everything in here so that we've covered all bases.
Through the chair, yes, I think the key purpose of this targeted engagement over the next month is really just to ensure that you, when you come to make your final decision on this, have a very clear understanding of all of the impact, including the impact on the different groups, the concessionaires, the users of the parks, and the people most directly affected, and that will include financial impact.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A somewhat different view to Councillor Lee. I don't think the officials' efforts are at all confusing. I think the leadership messages are confusing, which makes it quite challenging. Just a clarity matter for me question. In the report, page 7, under 11 in the context, there's a comment here that says, disease spread to the apparently disease-free areas of Hunua and Gulf Islands. The question I have is a simple one. Do we know if the Hunuas are infected or not?
We've undertaken surveys, and all the samples that we've taken have come back negative. So we have no evidence that there is Cody dieback in the Hunua ranges, but it's very difficult to say for absolutely certain that it's not there somewhere and we just haven't found it yet.
Okay then, could I kindly encourage that we be a bit more cautious around the terms, because apparent to me arguably suggests otherwise. It also as much suggests to me, although the sampling's returning a negative, it's almost like our officials is putting $1 each way. Those are my words. The only other question I have, Madam Chair, is more around our internal process. So you're about to move recommendations. A question I have for you, is this option 3 included in the minutes before me in your recommendations? Because I'm having difficulty finding it, of this report. Yes. Does that cover option 3?
I see the confusion. So what we've done here, rather than do a bit of a buck each way, you know, councillors can do this or do that, or the committee can do this or do that. We've got the options within the body of the report, so we understand exactly that all of the information and all the options have been explored, but we're just going straight to that this is the recommendation, and certainly as chair, it's the recommendation I will be moving, and it is option 3.
Thank you.
Thank you. And as a Titirangi resident of over 50 years, with a section with about 30 kauri on, I would like to be the seconder to that motion, please. What doesn't worry me? Oh, well, I'll support it. Anyway, the question's to Barry, and Barry's the only other resident around this table. And the rangers, Barry, what really worries me is the light green areas outside, which is the private land. What are we doing? And again, I know in Titirangi Road, my side of the road, there is no infection, and on the other side of the road, there is considerable infection. What are we doing to help educate the residents in those areas? Now, I heard about program through the schools, etc. So that's good. The kids are doing something, and maybe some of them are going home and making their parents aware. But what are we doing in those light green areas? Because we just may end up exacerbating things. We think everything's sweet, and yet everything's going to get worse in the light green areas of option 3.
Through the Chair, thank you for the question. And yes, we have carry on our property too, and I planted them some time ago, and with the expectation about 400 years, the view from our balcony will not be what it is today. So we have carry there, and we look after it. It's a real question, and part of this program needs to be around educating those who have curry on their property, and how to look after those and protect those. In terms of this specifically, right now we are focused on primarily on the regional park area there, and local parks. There's a discussion already going on in that regard, and that's the area that we can control. Controlled area notice in the future could have some bearing on that, because that's irrespective of boundaries. It's about transfer of contaminated material or infected material. So that's something that we can look at and move to. But that messaging around protection of carry on private property is important, and the responsibility of property owners.
Well, as the Waitakere Local Board in their presentation reminded us of the clause section 8 under the Waitakere Ranges Heritage Act that requires council to endeavour to protect the heritage feature of the whole area. Now, that area does go right down to Green Bay and along the cliffs, and is a wider area than what we're doing there. So I just would point out that we have obligations through another Act of Parliament where we need to be doing our best to protect.
Noted.
The question? Yeah.
I don't have the number of trees we've injected at the table with me, but we can certainly find that. Well, not right in front of me here, but we do have that information, and we can provide that. So we have done media stories about that, but we can.
Closing tracks and not about the other essential aspect of treating this
Yep.
disease outbreak.
Sure, and so we've been pushing out those positive comms messages in a range of ways, including for phosphate.
Let's get some data out there. New Zealanders are practical people. They like people who do things, and they're more likely to support us and cooperate if they know we're actually getting stuck in and treating the disease where we can.
I think, Phil, what we might do is circulate some of the media that releases and the memos that we've prepared. I think Councillor Lee makes a good point. Sadly, every time we've sent them out, it's been blanketed by councils doing nothing, councils not doing anything. So sadly, that's what's got reported, not the phosphate injections and the work that's been done. We can circulate that. We can circulate that. Okay, let's.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Apologies, I had this and it just slipped me. Under the land ownership provisions, in enforcement and compliance, can patrols, in the practical sense, not trespass those who breach?
So I think if I'm understanding your question correctly, you're asking if we have patrols working within the park, is there the opportunity to do something other than trespass?
No, I'm asking because you quoted it, under the land ownership provisions, under that, whether whomever the enforcement community are, have an ability to trespass any of those who breach the rules.
So our rangers have the ability to request people that are breaking the rules to leave the park. The taking of the formal trespass action goes through the police.
I think we've exhausted the questions. They were excellent questions, and thank you for the clarity of the answers. Let's move on to the recommendations, and I will move the recommendations on page 6. Councillor Filipaina will second the recommendations. And in moving those, it's very clear to me that we've worked through a series of issues over the last few months. So we've now got to the point where we need to take a deep breath and take this action. However, and I think we've covered the point very well, that together with Te Kaurau Āmaki, our businesses, our concessionaires and our users, we need to work through what the practical implications of this are and see if some of the exceptions can be well thought through and well planned and acceptable to all sides. And I think that's the critical piece of work we need to get on with. I think it is unequivocal. I think it's very clear, and it's certainly from what the local board have said and the discussions that Councillor Filipaina has had with Te Kaurau Āmaki, it certainly supports the approach that they wished that we would take. So I'll move that. It'll be seconded. And speaking to the recommendation, I do ask, I know I've got Mayor Goff, Councillor Walker, Councillor Clow, in speaking to this, members, I ask that we don't, a lot has been said about this. I don't think we need the speeches again. Let's be clear, concise and brief. Mayor Goff.
We live in hope over all of those things, Madam Chair.
We do. Show them the way.
Lead by example. I just want to say to begin with that I regard this as one of the most important issues that we will be confronting as a council. What we are looking at here is, on the evidence that we have in front of us, is the potential extinction of an iconic tree. If not the extinction, then the decimation and the wiping out of icons that are, sometimes 500, 600, 700 years old. And all of us understand the obligation that we have. Grandad, Grandma, what did you do to help stop the extinction of the kauri tree? When I was at school, we were sorted into different houses. We didn't have Gryffindor and Slytherin and things like that in those days. We had bird names, and I was placed in Huia. And I asked the question, what is a Huia? And I was explained kindly to me by one of my teachers that was a beautiful native bird that became extinct about 60 years ago. So we've got a bit of history to live down, and we have to make sure that we can make a difference in this area. That is the reason why I put up for a targeted rate, that we needed the resources. We can pass all the motions we like in this committee. Unless we've got the resources to back up what we decide to do, our actions are merely words. In the targeted rate, and you've got to go out and explain to people in the next month about the targeted rate, we allow the increase from 3 million over a 10-year period to deal with the Kauri dieback disease and increase to nearly 100 million, a 30-fold increase. It's one of two targeted rates, and it's put in there for a very important reason, because we cannot afford not to meet our obligations to do everything we can to ensure the survival of the Kauri in our region. I want to thank officials for this report. There are only a few people around this table that probably know how much blood and sweat you've exhausted to get to this point where we've got clear recommendations. And I genuinely acknowledge the really hard work that you put into that, and also you, Madam Chair, for the work that you've done on that. Last December, we asked you to implement a series of things that seemed like quite strong action at the time, but to report back to us on whether that was sufficient and where we needed to go from here. And when I look at your report back, I see that you've done quite a lot. And so, you know, those that say, you council officials, you've sat back and you've done nothing, it's simply not true. You can see in this report exactly what you've done. But you've also reported back to us that the current approach that council is taking is not working. Not working for a variety of reasons, chief of which is that we have not yet got the acceptance of Aucklanders that a dramatic action like closing much of that forest is warranted by the level of the risk. And, you know, people have said quite rightly, as a criticism, there's been confusion. And in the Herald today, there's this article with a little picture on it, and it's Waitakere Rahui area. A customary prohibition has been placed to protect our Kauri forest. Please do not enter this area. That sounds to me like a request and an optional choice that people have had to make, not a prohibition and a direction. And I think that we have to move away from that. Only a percentage of Aucklanders understand the significance of a rahui. We need to term it very bluntly in terms of this is a prohibition based on the fact that if you go into this area, you risk spreading Kauri dieback disease and you risk making our Kauri tree extinct. And therefore, it is prohibited for you to go into these areas. Now, that leaves no room for confusion. A please at the start of it, leaving a car park open, not fencing an entry off, is actually a signal to too many of our people that actually, yeah, it's a worry, but hey, you can do it. We've got to change the culture of Aucklanders and the understanding of Aucklanders, and I believe that recommendation 3 does that. I am interested in recommendation 2. I've come to the conclusion that that 2 and 3 are not dissimilar. My worry was that if we make a clear-cut prohibition and we don't have the evidential basis for prohibiting people, we lose credibility. And if we lose credibility, all we've got left is compliance, and we know how hard that is. We must maintain credibility, and that's why I asked the question before, if there are areas that are safe to go into, that there is absolutely minimal risk, then the 1 million people who visit the Waitakeres each year now then still have the option to go somewhere and know it's safe. We should err on the side of caution, but if it is safe and we say you can't go there, then they're going to challenge our credibility. But I think that option 3 allows us, by May, when we make the final decision here, to say forested areas are closed other than for the areas where science and evidence, empirical facts show that it is safe for you to go. And that's a good starting point. And as we do more on the tracks, then there may be more areas that we can allow people to go into. Because we're not keeping people out of it for the sake of it. We're keeping them out because that is what is necessary to preserve what they want to go there to see. So it makes sense to do it that way. So, Madam Chair, I support the recommendations made. I do so on the basis that we will have sensible exemptions, that we will look after our concessionaires who are responsible because their living depends on protecting the resource that is there, that we do the signage and we close off the, build a deer fence across the entrances, because if you make it harder for people to go into, then they don't just wander through. Don't leave the entrance open. Don't leave the car park open. I think that we've got to back it up with real actions, and most of all, we've got to back it up with the resourcing to actually tackle this problem. And the government needs to be encouraged to support what we're doing with the controlled area notice, and they need to be encouraged to put the investment in to finding a solution to the disease itself. I take Councillor Lee's point on that. And they need to take responsibility also for all the other areas of Kauri. We're only looking at the Waitakaris. We need to look at all of the other areas. I live in the Hunuas, and I support closing the at-risk areas of the Hunuas and keeping the areas open where it's safe for people to go to. So thank you, Madam Chair, for this report. Thank you, officials, for the work you've put into it. I think it deserves strong support from the governing body.
Mr Mayor, now I've got Councillor Watson, Clow, Councillor Filipaina, and Member Brown. I am going to be quite clear though. We've got probably 3 people, I'm hoping, speaking in support. Well, I'll ask for people who disagree, and then we'll put the recommendation. I don't think there feels like there's a huge amount more to say. Councillor Watson.
Madam Chair, and thank you to some of the people that have spoken to us today, not least of which is the local board, which I think spelt out very clearly the situation we're facing here today. The public reaction has been confused, the signage unclear, and what has been really missing has been effective messaging. And the public response in that respect has, while disappointing, has been entirely predictable, because that's exactly what people said in the December meeting would happen. We would send out a mixed message to people that, yes, it was okay to come into the Waitakaris on some tracks if you kept to these tracks, and perhaps not to others. And anyone that knows anything to do with public psychology, and that's what we're dealing with now, is you in an instance such as this, you have to be very clear. You have to hit people between the eyes with your messaging, and we haven't done that with the predictable results. In fact, worse than the predictable results, if the ambassador's comments are anything to go by, where we have almost, it would appear, a degree of contempt by some of the people that are going up there for what the council and others are trying to do. So I'm firmly of the belief, as is the Waitakere Rangers local board, that if the message is kept very clear and appropriate penalties are also highlighted very clearly, that's going to do it for most people, and that any recalcitrant elements can then be dealt with, because they'll be very clearly, easily defined. If you're going up there in a car, you have to park your car, which is visible. Straight away, once you start removing large numbers of people, then it's very easy to focus on the ones that remain. And to be honest, and I appreciate the budgeting that has taken place, I doubt whether it will take that degree of resourcing to actually enforce this ban against anyone who would then go up in the face of very clear signage that shows that they are committing an offence, or they are in a prohibited area, that they will be prosecuted, or any other such language that might be chosen to be used. It will be a rather brave and foolish person that then chooses to cross the line. So I think in that respect, the degree of difficulty in actually doing what we were told in December we would have to do has been somewhat exaggerated, and I'm hopeful, therefore, that with this option 3 up and running, we can finally accord the seriousness of this issue that it deserves. And no one's for a minute suggesting that the council officers haven't been taking it seriously, but we have not proceeded until now to the response that guarantees us the highest level of kauri protection, which we were once again told back in December. We've been told it again, and hopefully this time we will listen and vote the appropriate way. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not going to go over what's been said, but I do, however, just want to acknowledge Your Worship, the Mayor, in regards to your kōrero. I'm going to, I mean, obviously I support this because of the work that both yourself, I have, Independent Māori Statutory Board members have done, our staff that have consulted and worked with Te Kaurau Amaki. You know, Chair, it's interesting. I started the conversation with Te Kaurau Amaki last week, of all times, to try and get our rangatira to rangatira done. It was done on Friday. And as of about 11:15 this morning, still talking to Edward Ashboy in regards to these recommendations. And they supported in principle. That was the key thing for me, is that I needed to hear back from Te Kaurau Amaki and what their view was in regards to this, and to hear him say to me, look, we support it in principle, but we look forward to the conversation that they will have with our staff. And again, just to acknowledge Te Kaurau Amaki, because with Te Warena, speaking to him last week and over the weekend, you know, Chair, we've got to a position now that I believe is the right position. And it's about, as Member Brown said, it was about having that consultation. But I think that the word is genuine consultation, instead of just, you know, let's just talk about it and then we'll go away and come back again. But, you know, Chair, that's really what I want to say, because I'm not going to go over what happened from December. For me, it's looking forward, and just saying again, just to you, to Independent Māori Statutory Board, again to our staff, but especially to Te Kaurau Maki. I'm just glad we're settled here. Kia ora.
Tenacity in sticking with this. Councillor Clark.
Thank you for allowing me to speak, because if you're enforcing the standing orders, you wouldn't let me speak, because I'm supportive of it, and we've had 3 speakers in support. I'm just going to be brief. I just really want to reiterate what the Mayor said about the natural environment targeted rate that's going out for consultation that this council has endorsed, and I think it was almost unanimous at the time. But I think it's really important for the audience to be aware and hopefully supportive to get out and really push acceptance and endorsement of that natural environment targeted rate, and especially option 2, which is the more significant and larger of the 2 options. And I noticed in the press text we had the 2 Simons there, which I'm hoping we'll be doing a similar educative thing, and especially Simon from the Western Leader, because they've done a good job now, but I would like to think that the Western Leader is going to do a more outstanding job in highlighting the plight of the kauri in the Waitakiris, and it would be much appreciated, I think, again by the Waitakere Local Board and many of us from the West, if that continual educative program is highlighted on an ongoing basis by the Western Leader. Thank you.
Liz, can I just check if there's anyone who wishes to speak against the recommendation? If there isn't, we're going to put it. Those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried unanimously. Thank you very much. The public who are here, you're really welcome to go down to level 3 to grab a much needed drink and a sandwich, and we will be exactly half an hour. We'll be back here by 1:30. Thank you.